going to start? Hi, my name is Professor Ives Itzerda. I'm here to give you a little bit of a talk on nanotechnology. And I'd like to remind you, if you have any questions, just type them into the window and I can read them here and try to answer them. Now remember, I can't hear you, so I won't be able to answer any questions that are shouted out in the classroom. So I apologize for that. So I'm going to start just by telling you a little bit about nanotechnology and what we're doing here at Montana State University. I'm in the physics department, but I work with a lot of other people in nanotechnology, in chemistry, biology, a lot of different fields. So let's start by thinking, when was the first time anyone ever mentioned nanotechnology? Where did this idea come from? Well, there was a famous physicist called Richard Feynman. He actually won the Nobel Prize in Physics for this work, and he started with asking a question in a paper called "There's Plenty of Room at the Bottom," and his question was, why can't we write the Encyclopedia Britannica on the head of a pin? That's what physicists do. We ask stupid questions sometimes, but they're a lot of fun to answer. And what he answered was, that we can. But the real question is, what would we use to write it? And how could we write it? And finally, how do we read it? And that's what I want to tell you about, and then I'll tell you about what we do here at Montana State University. So Richard Feynman, in this paper, he said, let's use something small, the smallest animal he could think of, which was the dust mite. Now, is a dust mite small enough to write? Well, here's a picture of a dust mite made by a scanning electron microscope. And you can see that he's pretty small. Can't see him with your naked eye almost. But there are smaller things. Here are some little gears. And maybe this dust mite is making these little gears. But these little gears aren't nanotechnology. Those little gears are microtechnology. Micro-electromechanical structures, MEMS. That's a lot bigger than nano. That's 1,000 times bigger than nanotechnology, but that's the way we start. So what else could be something that is the size that would be right for nanotechnology? Well, everyone likes to talk about things like the human hair. How small is a human hair? A human hair, I can write it in nanometers. 100,000 nanometers, but that's more like 100 microns, so that's still pretty big. So we still haven't figured out what we're going to use to write the Encyclopedia Britannica, and not even talked about how we're going to read it yet. So if you were to think about what the smallest thing is that you could think of, think about that just for a little bit, and I'm going to tell you what we use in nanotechnology. Here is a nanofiber wrapped around a human hair, and you can see it's a lot smaller. And what we use to write things with are atoms. So here's an atom. An atom is about 1/10 of a nanometer. So maybe I can use a lot of atoms. And in fact, if I take 10 atoms and I put them all in a row, that's when I get 1 nanometer. Now that's pretty small. That means that my writing has to be really small, and it's going to be hard to do. But we can do it. Let me use this really complicated picture to try to show you the scale of things. At the top, we have things like ants. On the left side, we have things made by biology, and on the right side, we have things that we make. And as you work down in each one of those pictures, you can see things get smaller and smaller and smaller until I get down at the bottom for DNA, which is actually the best way to record information, because in those little strands of DNA are all the information you need to make a person, which is really amazing. That's why nanotechnology has so many possibilities. On the right side, we see atoms made into a corral, and they use a scanning tunneling microscope to make those atoms. Now, I also have a picture of the M from Montana State. That's not to say we're small. We're actually pretty big. It's just to show you where we sit in the nanotechnology area. And what I'd like to tell you about is how we put nanomagnetic materials inside protein cages. And the first thing you should think about is, why would they want to do that? Well, remember, I told you physicists like to ask stupid questions all the time, and here's another one, but I'll show you that it's really pretty useful later on. So now I want to talk about how I'm going to build things one atom at a time, because that's how I'm going to write with nanotechnology. That's how I'm going to make things, not just a book, but I'm going to make little machines. And here I have a picture of machines moving around atoms. Well, if the machines are moving around atoms, I would like to know, what's the machine made of? Actually, we do use machines to move around atoms, but the machines are really big. It's funny, the smaller the thing is that I need to move around, the bigger machine I need to move it with nowadays. So that's one of the things about nanotechnology. The way we would read it is using a microscope, but not the kind of microscope I just showed you, like a lens, an optical microscope. I meant an electron microscope. So I'm going to use electrons to look at things, because electrons are actually smaller than atoms. Atoms are made up of electrons as well as some other stuff. Well, I'm going to use the electron, and I'm going to use the electron to see where I put things. So here's a picture of an electron micrograph showing where little crystals are. And these are nano-sized crystals. You can see I have a scale bar that says 100 nanometers. So these things are about 20 nanometers in size, and they're actually things we've made here at Montana State University. I show you a close-up of the gold nanoparticle, and it's only 5.5 nanometers across. It's really pretty small. A better way to do it is to use a super electron microscope called a cryo-electron microscope, and then we can get some beautiful pictures about viruses, about nanoparticles, and about very small things. So that's what we've been using most recently to look at some of our materials, these cryo-electron microscopes. That's what the EM stands for. If I were to ask you what you know of that's made by nanotechnology, I don't think anyone would say my car is made of nanotechnology. But guess what? There are cars that have parts that are made by nanotechnology, and it's just some of the parts, not the whole car. Even though here's an article from the Detroit News, everyone knows Detroit is where they make the best cars. Detroit News talking about cars that are going to be assembled atom by atom. Well, what they really mean are parts of cars, like the fiberglass components, some composite materials to make them lighter and stronger, and that way I can get better gas mileage. And here I have a picture of a Hummer made out of nanotechnology. So even the biggest cars can benefit from using nanotechnology. Well, what other areas can you think of that people are actually making things with nanotechnology? Just take a second and think about it. What do you think nanotechnology is being shown right now? Where could I buy some nanotechnology? I bet you some of you said computers. You'd be right. All that electronic stuff is bound to be small. But I bet you didn't know you could also buy clothing with nanotechnology. So here was a version of nanotechnology, NanoWear from Eddie Bauer. And what they found was if I used nanofibers, I could spill grape juice on my shirt and it wouldn't stain my shirt. So it was one of those wonderful things. There's a lot of places that you wouldn't expect to find nanotechnology already where I can buy it, but here's one of them. The place that I think that the biggest breakthroughs are going to happen in nanotechnology is in the field of medicine. And in fact, the National Cancer Institute has a whole division on looking at nanotechnology for the treatment of cancer. And that's what I'd like to talk to you about today, and is one of the applications we've been working at MSU is how to treat cancer. And the way we're going to do it is by putting magnetic nanoparticles inside of a cage, a protein cage. And what I'm going to do with that is going to be treat cancer, and I'm going to show you how we're going to treat cancer in a couple of ways. So imagine that I could take something, a protein cage, just like the proteins you have in your body, and put a little tiny magnetic nanoparticle in it. And by a magnetic nanoparticle, I'm going to use a steel ball bearing. You can barely see it here. And that steel ball bearing is going to be my magnetic nanoparticle. And I'm going to show you what I could do with a magnetic nanoparticle. So first, I'm going to take something else, and this something else is actually a magnet. I've got it inside of this, this black film canister because it's a very strong magnet, and it would erase my credit card, so I have to be careful with it. Let me show you it's a magnet. It'll stay right on the wall where I put it. Now I'm going to take something like, a tube, and I'm going to show you how I can use a magnet and a magnetic nanoparticle in order to do interesting things. So here's my magnet. Here's my magnetic nanoparticle. I don't know if you can see this very well, but I hope you can see that wherever I move the magnetic nanoparticle follows it. I'll move the magnet aside, and you can see the ball rolls to the end. And that way, I can actually take anything that I've made with a magnetic nanoparticle and move it inside your body with a magnetic field. And that way, I can get the magnetic nanoparticle anywhere I want. Now, imagine that that protein cage doesn't just have a magnetic nanoparticle, but it might have a drug that cures cancer. And I can bring that drug all the way to where you are, to where the cancer is, and I can treat your cancer rather than treating your whole body. And let me show you an example of how we do that. Here's a picture of that protein. Some of you might recognize it as one of those toys that when you pull on the ends, it gets bigger, and when you push it down, it gets smaller. Well, what's neat is here is the outside, and here is the inside, and I can put, say, here's a little red ball. I'm going to say that's the magnetic nanoparticle or the drug. I can put it inside of my protein. Now, tell me, what part does the body see? It only sees the outside. It doesn't see what's inside the nanoparticle. And if I use a protein that your body always uses, something called ferritin, I can put this in your body and your body won't reject it because it'll just see the outside and it'll say, hey, that's just that protein that I know, ferritin. And I can take my magnet and I can move it around until I get it to where I need it to be over by the cancer cell. And when it's at the cancer cell, I can open up the nanoparticle and I just delivered the drug. Now, wouldn't that be cool? That's called targeted drug delivery. And what's great is I don't have to use a lot of drug. I just use enough to kill your cancer cells. There's another way that I'm going to treat cancer, and it's not by using drugs, but by using some physics. Everyone knows that when I take a magnetic particle and I move it around, if I move it really fast, guess what happens? It gets hot. It heats up. Well, some of you have gone skiing before, and you know about something called hypothermia, where I get too cold. And that's not good for you, right? That's when you come inside before you get frostbite. Well, there's also something called hyperthermia, where I make things hotter. Now, most of you have probably had a fever before, and you know what it's like when I get a little bit hot, when I have a fever of 102 degrees instead of being 98. Well, if I had a fever of 108 degrees, that's very, very dangerous. And in fact, it could kill cells. Well, that means one way I could kill cells is by heating them up to 108 degrees. And if I could do that locally, not by heating the whole body, but just by heating the cancer cell, by moving my magnetic particle over to the cancer cell and then moving it really quickly, that way I could heat up the cancer cell and I could kill the cancer cell not with drugs, but just by using heat, by using hyperthermia. And those are the two directions that we've used at Montana State University in order to target cancer therapy using nanotechnology. And I'd like to finish by showing you one last view graph. And this is what we would like to do by using a multifunctional, isn't that a great word? Multifunctional nanomaterials. Multifunctional means I have more than one thing it does. It can carry my drug. It can be delivered to a particular place. I show in this picture these little green lines. Those are another kind of protein. And this protein now just sticks to cancer cells, say breast cancer. Well, that means that this will only go to breast cancer cells. Those little blue dots in the middle, I can put another atom, another kind of atom called gadolinium on the outside. And when I use a MRI, which is one of those machines in the hospital, that wherever a gadolinium atom is, it lights up like a bright little light. And I can therefore see where all the nanoparticles went. So I now have targeted drug delivery. And that's where we would like to be in about 10 more years, being able to do this as a part of some cancer treatment. That's all I had for you today. I have a little bit more time if any of you would like to ask questions of me. And if not, I hope you come visit me at Montana State University in the physics department, and we'll show you our cool lab. So if anyone has any questions, please type them in. I'm going to wait a little bit longer to see if there's any more questions. I'm sure that everyone needs to get back to class. Nanobots. That's a great question. People always want to know, can't I have nanobots like they have on Star Trek, where they move around and they do lots of things? Well, nanobots, no one has made them yet because it's really hard to communicate with them. So I have to make the nanobots do things on their own. Right now we don't have any nanobots, the kind that I can program and tell them what to do, but we have things like nanobots because they self-assemble. When I put a whole bunch of them into a petri dish, they all come together in a particular way. Just like crystals form inside your body, these things now will form their own little crystals using these nanostructures. So it's a very good question, but right now we haven't made anything that I can program. That's what I'd like to do with a nanobot, program it to do what I want. Any other questions? So another question was, how long have we been testing nanotechnology? Nanotechnology, even though it was talked about in 1959, and that's a long time ago. That was even before I was born. Can you believe that? Well, we've been working on nanotechnology for only about 8 years. It's been worked on for probably 20 years, depending on how I define nanotechnology. But what we think of nanotechnology nowadays, it's only been about 20 years. Any more questions? Oh, the space elevator cable. Someone has been reading their sci-fi books. That's a good one. That's made with a carbon nanotube that is really, really long. We're talking about a single nanotube that can go from the Earth all the way up to the International Space Station or further. Well, the space elevator is a good idea. The problem is making a carbon nanotube that long is pretty hard. Right now, the longest we can make them are a few millimeters. Now, people can work and making them longer and longer, but I think that they would rather work on other parts of nanotechnology and not just the space elevator. Any more questions from you great students out there? Well, thank you for being such an attentive audience. I've never had students who are so quiet. Thank you very much, and pleasure talking with you. Bye.